Hi, Rebecca Jarrett-Dalton from Two Red Shoes Mortgage Brokers. I'm going to talk to you about who should not buy off the plan. So, off the plan, very difficult to avoid in Sydney at the moment. Pretty much all of the units and certainly all of the land developments are being sold off the plan. What does it mean? It means quite literally you're buying an incomplete, possibly not even started project off of a plan, some diagrams and some pretty pictures designed up by designers. Typically these are taking between 2 and 3 years to complete, so you're sort of hedging your bets that things stay much the same in the future, and the developers kind of hedging their bets that things don't go crazy and they're not losing too much money. The issue with off the plan is that the world can be quite different in a couple of years, both for you personally and within the broader lending spectrum. So some of the risks that we see with off the plan, the primary one is valuation. When the block or when the unit is finished, what's it actually going to be worth? I've got some horror stories, but we have actually seen an inner city unit development where when it was completed, there was a block of units just up the road, very, very much similar units, and the developer there got into trouble and he discounted those units just to get rid of them. Valuations work in that the valuer looks at what is your unit, what makes it up, how big is it, how many bedrooms, what are the attributes, and how does that compare to other properties that have sold recently that have the same attributes. So in this instance, our development had large 2 bedrooms, single bathroom, single car space units. So did the developer up the road. He sold his about 100 grand under what was really the prevailing market price. But from the valuer's perspective now, he's got a hard time justifying that your unit is worth 100 grand more than somebody else just paid down the road. So the number one risk for off the plan is actually valuation risk. If you're borrowing a really high percentage, if you're relying on borrowing a really high percentage of that unit, you could get into trouble. So for example, if you're a buyer who was already borrowing 90% of a $500,000 unit and the unit valuation comes in at $400,000, you're still set by the same parameters, so you're still able to only borrow around 90 to 95% of that valuation amount. Where are you coming up with for the rest of it? The other risk with off the plan, or the major risk, is changes in lending policy. Again, we saw this in the GFC where we had people who were buying vacant blocks of land down in Melbourne, and they were buying them in a trust or a unit trust set up. The GFC came through, the banks lost complete confidence in lending to unit trusts, and when the blocks were ready to go, you just couldn't find a lender. So there was nothing that they could do. The other big risk is actually in changes to your personal circumstances. So people have babies, people change jobs. Suddenly you might not qualify for the loan that you need to finish off your purchase. What I would say to you is, if you do buy something off the plan, do not decide to become self-employed. Please try and stick in the job that you're in, or at least a very, very similar occupation. And if you're going to change it over, change well in advance of the settlement date. Settlement date is another one. Settlement date almost never goes to plan. So if you're being sold a development on the basis that it'll be ready in 6 or 8 months, go and have a look at it. If they haven't broken ground, it's highly unlikely that it's going to be ready in 6 to 8 months. In your contract, there's actually a term called a sunset clause date. Sunset clause is the very last day that developer has to have that property ready for you without incurring penalties. And even then, there's some wiggle room. So even then, if they can show that there have been circumstances outside of their control, they can extend that sunset clause date. Again, just understand. So if you're a first-time buyer and you buy something off the plan today and it's not going to settle for 3 years, and then they extend the sunset clause date, it could be 3.5, 4 years before you're actually into that property. That's totally okay if you're happy to sit still and you're able to live where you are, and you're able to set that price way back here and the market is moving in an upwards direction. It becomes a little bit challenging. We've got some on the coast at the moment where the developer is trying to play some games. I think they've realised there's a lot more value in the land, and they're trying to rescind the contract. They're trying to get out of it. And those first-time buyers who bought in back then, they probably can't afford to buy at today's market rate, so they're sticking to their guns. Fortunately, we have seen some legislation go through that prevents developers playing games. There is still scope though for genuine issues where they've genuinely blown out. In those instances, by the way, if that developer wins his little game, he'll pay my clients back their deposit and he'll walk away and sell those blocks to someone else, which is a little bit rubbish. So, who should not buy off the plan? Somebody who has very particular circumstances that perhaps only fit through one or two lender molds. So that might be somebody with some interesting income sources, maybe someone who's not a typical buyer from a lender perspective. People with very small deposits, because as we said before, there's not a lot of scope for a bit of a dodgy valuation. People who are expecting dramatic changes to their lives, that's another set of people that should try and avoid off the plan purchases. Basically, if you're borderline in any kind of way, see if there's something completed that you can buy. I do understand how challenging it is, but I don't think you're going to like the result of losing a deposit if you're unable to settle.